Welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories. The morning sun slanted through the windows of the Beresford sitting room, casting cheerful squares of light across the Persian rug. Tuppence Beresford sat curled in her favourite armchair, a cup of rapidly cooling tea balanced on the arm, her attention fixed on the Morning Post. Tommy stood by the window, ostensibly reading the Times, though he'd been stuck on the same paragraph about agricultural tariffs for the past 5 minutes. "Tommy," Tuppence said suddenly, in that particular tone that meant she'd discovered something interesting. Tommy responded, not looking up from his newspaper. "Tommy, do pay attention. This is rather extraordinary. Is it another charity appeal? We've already promised to attend the church fete, the village jumble sale, and that dreadful fundraising concert Mrs. Pemberton is organising." "It's nothing of the sort." Tuppence unfolded a sheet of cream-coloured writing paper. "It's from Aunt Beatrice." Tommy lowered his newspaper at last. "Your Aunt Beatrice? The one who lives in that gloomy pile in Suffolk? Willowmere House, yes. She's written asking if we might visit. Actually, she sounds rather insistent about it." Tuppence frowned at the letter. "Listen to this. Dear Tuppence, I realise this is short notice, but I find myself in need of sensible company. There are matters here that trouble me, and I know you have a practical head on your shoulders. Could you and Thomas possibly come for a week or so? I should be most grateful. The house is not what it was, but you'll have comfortable rooms, and I hope find the countryside agreeable. Please do come soon. Your affectionate aunt, Beatrice Ashford." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Matters that trouble her? That doesn't sound like your Aunt Beatrice. I thought she was made of iron and old Suffolk granite." "She is," Tuppence said thoughtfully, "which makes this all the more interesting. She's not the sort to ask for help lightly." She looked up at Tommy with that gleam in her eye he'd come to know well over their years of marriage. "We should go, don't you think?" "Tuppence," Tommy said warningly. "We promised ourselves a quiet month, remember? After that business with the stolen jewels in Bath, you said—" "I know what I said. But this is different. This is family." Tuppence stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the garden where roses nodded in the summer breeze. "Besides, it's been ages since we've seen Aunt Beatrice, and there's something in this letter." She tapped it against her palm. "Something between the lines. I think she's frightened Tommy, though she'd never admit it." Tommy studied his wife's profile, noting the set of her jaw. After 20-odd years of marriage, he knew when an argument was futile. Moreover, he had to admit his own curiosity was piqued. Beatrice Ashford was indeed formidable. A woman who'd managed a large estate through 2 wars and numerous family crises without ever appearing ruffled. "Very well," he said, folding his newspaper with an air of resignation. "When shall we leave?" Tuppence turned, her face lighting up. "Tomorrow? I'll telephone the station about trains. Willowmere is near Aldeburgh, if I remember correctly. Rather remote." "Naturally," Tommy murmured. "All the best mysteries happen in remote locations." "Don't be silly, Tommy. There's no mystery. Just an elderly aunt who wants company." But even as she said it, Tuppence's fingers worried at the edge of the letter, and her eyes had that distant, calculating look that usually meant she was already several steps ahead in her thinking. Tommy smiled to himself. Whatever awaited them at Willowmere House, he was quite certain it would not be a quiet week in the countryside. The following afternoon found them on a train rattling through the Suffolk countryside. The landscape had grown increasingly flat and windswept as they travelled east, the hedgerows giving way to vast stretches of marshland and sky. Tuppence pressed her nose to the window like a child, watching herons standing motionless in shallow waters. "I'd forgotten how wild it is out here," she said, "like another country entirely." They changed trains at Saxmundham, taking a smaller local service that seemed to stop at every hamlet and crossing. At last, the conductor called out, "Willowmere, halt!" and they gathered their luggage. The station was little more than a platform with a small wooden shelter. A single taxi waited in the gravel yard beyond, its driver, a weathered man in his 60s, touching his cap as they approached. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford? Mrs. Ashford sent me to collect you. Name's Gedge. I do the taxi service hereabouts." As they drove along narrow lanes overhung with trees, Gedge proved unexpectedly talkative. "Not many visitors to Willowmere these days," he observed. "Mrs. Ashford keeps to herself mostly. The house was grand once, mind you. Before the war, the first war, I mean. There were parties, shooting weekends, all that. But the old colonel died in 17, and after that, well..." He shrugged. "Things changed. Is Mrs. Ashford quite alone there?" Tuppence asked. "Alone? Lord, no. There's Mrs. Cook, the housekeeper, and her husband, what does the garden and general repairs. And then there's Miss Lavinia. That's Mrs. Ashford's companion. Been with her 5 years or more. And recently..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Recently there's been Mr. Warwick staying, artist fellow from London. Rented the old gamekeeper's cottage." Tommy caught the note of disapproval. "You don't care for Mr. Warwick?" "Not for me to say, sir. But artists..." Gedge shook his head. "Not the sort we usually see round here. Keeps odd hours. Goes tramping about the marshes with his easel at all times of day and night. Mrs. Ashford lets him use her studio. The late colonel was quite the amateur painter, you see. There's a proper studio in the north wing." The lane curved, and suddenly Willowmere House rose before them. A substantial Georgian manor of weathered brick, its symmetrical facade softened by creeping wisteria. Windows glinted in the afternoon sun, giving the house a watchful appearance. The gardens had a slightly unkempt look, as though the staff were fighting a losing battle with nature. As Gedge pulled up before the front steps, the door opened and Aunt Beatrice emerged. She was much as Tuppence remembered. Tall and upright despite her 70-some years, her white hair swept back in an elegant chignon, her face lined but handsome. She wore a silk dress of dove grey, and carried herself with unconscious authority. "Tuppence, my dear child, and Thomas, how good of you to come so quickly." Her voice was warm, but Tommy noticed the tightness around her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she embraced Tuppence. As they entered the cool, shadowy hall, Tuppence said quietly, "Aunt Beatrice, what's troubling you?" "Your letter later, dear. Let's get you settled first. Mrs. Cook has prepared the blue bedroom for you. It has lovely views over the garden." Beatrice gestured to a neat, grey-haired woman who'd appeared silently from a side corridor. "Mrs. Cook, would you show Mr. and Mrs. Beresford to their room? We'll have tea in the drawing-room in half an hour." But as Tuppence turned to follow the housekeeper, Aunt Beatrice caught her arm and whispered, just loud enough for Tommy to hear, "The painting, Tuppence. It's the painting that's wrong." Before Tuppence could respond, footsteps echoed on the stairs, and a thin, anxious-looking woman of about 50 descended, clutching a shawl around her shoulders despite the warmth of the afternoon. "Beatrice, I've been looking for you everywhere. I thought I heard voices in the east corridor again, and oh..." She stopped, noticing the visitors. "Lavinia, these are my niece and her husband, the Beresfords." Tuppence, Thomas. This is Miss Lavinia Crane, my companion and dear friend." Miss Crane's smile was tremulous. "How lovely. We so rarely have visitors. You'll find Willowmere quite peaceful, I'm sure, though—" She glanced nervously at Beatrice, though perhaps not entirely as quiet as one might wish. There was an awkward pause, broken by Mrs. Cook's practical voice. "Shall I show you upstairs now?" As they followed the housekeeper up the broad staircase, Tommy caught Tuppence's eye and saw his own thoughts reflected there. Whatever Aunt Beatrice had summoned them for, it was clear that Willowmere House harboured secrets, and possibly dangers, that went beyond the concerns of a lonely elderly woman. The game, as they said, was afoot. The blue bedroom lived up to its name, with walls papered in a delicate pattern of cornflowers and cream, and windows that looked out over a wilderness of roses running down to a small lake. While Tommy unpacked their cases, Tuppence explored the room, running her fingers along the carved mantelpiece and examining the watercolours on the walls. "These are rather good," she murmured, studying a marsh scene signed with the initials H.A. "The late Colonel's work, I suppose? What do you make of that business about the painting?" Tommy asked, hanging his jacket in the mahogany wardrobe. "I haven't the faintest idea. But did you notice how nervous Miss Crane seemed? And that odd comment about voices in the east corridor?" "Old houses make noises," Tommy said reasonably, "and companions are often nervous sorts." Perhaps. Tuppence didn't sound convinced. She moved to the window. "Tommy, come look at this." He joined her at the casement. Below, partially obscured by an overgrown yew hedge, a figure moved through the garden carrying what appeared to be a canvas. The man was perhaps 40, dressed in paint-stained trousers and a loose shirt, his dark hair falling across his forehead. "Mr. Warwick, I presume," Tommy said. "The artist from London." They watched as Warwick disappeared into a door at the far end of the house. A moment later, a light appeared in a ground-floor window of what must be the north wing. "The studio," Tuppence murmured. "I wonder what he's painting that requires such odd hours." A soft tap at the door announced Mrs. Cook. "Mrs. Ashford asks if you join her for tea now, if you're ready." They found Aunt Beatrice in the drawing-room, a gracious space dominated by a large bay window overlooking the front drive. Tea things were laid out on a rosewood table, and Miss Crane perched on the edge of a chair, already nibbling anxiously at a biscuit. Once they were settled with cups of tea and slices of excellent fruit-cake, Beatrice dismissed Mrs. Cook with a nod and turned to her guests. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked you here so urgently," she began. "The thought had crossed our minds," Tommy said mildly. Beatrice set down her cup with a precise click. "I need someone sensible to tell me I'm not losing my wits. Lavinia means well, but she's inclined to hysteria. Mrs. Cook thinks I'm imagining things, and I can hardly discuss this with strangers." "Discuss what, Aunt?" Tuppence leaned forward. "It began 3 months ago, shortly after Mr. Warwick took the cottage. He's writing a book about East Anglian artists, you see, and heard about Herbert's collection, my late husband's paintings. He asked permission to view them, and I saw no harm in it. I even allowed him use of the studio." "Very generous," Tommy observed. "Perhaps too generous." Beatrice's lips tightened. "Shortly after he arrived, I noticed something odd. You know the portrait gallery on the first floor? It runs the length of the east corridor. Family portraits going back 200 years. Tuppence nodded, vaguely remembering a dim, portrait-lined passage from childhood visits. "One of the paintings is different," Beatrice said flatly. "I walk that corridor every morning, have done for 40 years, and I tell you, one of the portraits has been changed, replaced with something else." "Changed?" Tommy frowned. Are you certain?" "Of course I'm certain." A spot of colour appeared in Beatrice's pale cheeks. "Do you think I don't know my own house? I'm not senile yet, Thomas. No one suggested you were," Tuppence said soothingly. "Which portrait?" "That's just it. I can't quite remember." "Isn't that maddening? I know something is wrong, but I can't put my finger on exactly what. Every portrait looks as it should, and yet—" She made a frustrated gesture. "It's like trying to remember a dream. The more I grasp for it, the more it slips away." Miss Crane spoke up timidly. "I've felt it too, a sense that something isn't right in that corridor. And there are the noises." "What sort of noises?" Tuppence asked. "Footsteps late at night, doors opening and closing. Once I could have sworn I heard voices, low, urgent voices, coming from somewhere near the portrait gallery." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged glances. "Has anything else unusual happened?" Tommy asked. Beatrice hesitated. "Small things. A drawer I'm certain I left locked was found open. Papers in Herbert's old study seemed disturbed. And then there was the incident with the ladder." "Ladder? Last week I was walking beneath the east corridor window. It's on the outside of the house, you understand. And a ladder that had been propped against the wall suddenly fell. Nearly struck me. Cook claimed he'd left it insecurely placed, but—" She shook her head. "It felt deliberate. Have you spoken to Mr. Warwick about any of this?" Tuppence asked carefully. "What could I say? That I think he's sneaking about my house at night, replacing paintings I can't even identify. He'd think me mad." Beatrice looked at them both with an expression that was almost pleading. "That's why I needed you. You've dealt with this sort of thing before. Strange occurrences, mysteries. We'll look into it," Tuppence promised. "Discreetly. Tonight, perhaps we might take a stroll through this portrait gallery." "After dinner," Beatrice said with evident relief. "I've invited Mr. Warwick to join us. You can form your own impressions of him." Dinner was served in a panelled dining room that had clearly once hosted much grander parties. Now just the five of them, Beatrice, Miss Crane, the Beresfords, and Charles Warwick, sat at one end of a table that could have accommodated 20. Warwick proved to be a man of considerable charm when he chose to exercise it. He had an artist's intense gaze and a way of focusing entirely on whomever was speaking, as though their words were the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. "Mrs. Beresford, your aunt has been extraordinarily generous in allowing me access to her late husband's work. Colonel Ashford had a remarkable eye for composition, quite underrated in my opinion. You're writing a book, I understand," Tuppence said. "An ambitious one, I'm afraid. Artists of the East Anglian coast. Painters who captured this unique landscape from the 18th century to the present day. Your uncle's work deserves a chapter of its own. How much longer will you be at Willowmere?" Tommy asked casually. Something flickered in Warwick's eyes. "Another few weeks, perhaps. It rather depends on my research." He turned to Beatrice. "I hope I haven't overstayed my welcome." "Not at all," Beatrice said, though her tone was cool. "Though I trust your work in the studio hasn't been too disruptive. I work mostly in the evenings and early mornings. The light, you know. Artists are slaves to the light." After dinner, as arranged, Beatrice led Tommy and Tuppence to the portrait gallery. The east corridor stretched before them, lit by wall sconces that cast wavering shadows across the paintings. Portrait after portrait gazed down. Georgian gentlemen in powdered wigs, Victorian ladies in crinolines, stern Edwardian patriarchs. "Start at this end," Beatrice instructed, "and look carefully at each one." They moved slowly along the corridor, examining each portrait. Tuppence studied the gilded frames, the brass nameplates, the brushwork and styles. Halfway down, she stopped before a portrait of a young woman in a blue dress, circa 1880. "Aunt Beatrice, who is this?" Beatrice peered at the nameplate. "Emily Ashford. Herbert's grandmother. Why?" "I'm not sure." Tuppence tilted her head, studying the painting. There's something about the frame. It looks newer than the others, or perhaps cleaner. Tommy examined it more closely. The brass plate is shinier, certainly, less tarnished. Beatrice stared at the portrait, her face growing pale. That's it, she whispered. That's what's wrong. This painting, it shouldn't be here. What do you mean? Tommy asked sharply. Emily Ashford. I remember now. This portrait used to hang in the library, not here. And the woman in the blue dress who hung in this spot was... She pressed her fingers to her temples. Someone else. Someone whose name I can't quite recall. Could the paintings simply have been switched? Tuppence suggested. Perhaps Mrs. Cook rearranged them. Mrs. Cook wouldn't dare touch the portraits without asking me. Beatrice's voice was firm. And besides, why would anyone switch them? Tommy walked the length of the corridor again, then returned to the portrait of Emily Ashford. He lifted one corner of the frame carefully, away from the wall. There's something here, he murmured. Marks on the wall, as though a different frame, slightly larger, used to hang in this spot. A floorboard creaked behind them. They turned to find Charles Warwick, standing at the corridor's entrance, his face in shadow. Forgive me, he said softly. I couldn't help overhearing. You're interested in the portraits. They're fascinating, aren't they? Each one tells a story. Though sometimes, he added, his eyes moving from face to face along the gallery, the real story is hidden beneath the paint. With that cryptic remark, he nodded goodnight and disappeared down the stairs. Tuppence watched him go, then turned to Tommy. What do you suppose he meant by that? I'm not sure, Tommy replied slowly, but I think our Mr. Warwick knows more about these paintings than he's letting on. As they stood in the flickering lamplight, surrounded by the watching eyes of long-dead Ashfords, Tuppence felt a small chill run down her spine. Somewhere in this house, among these portraits and passages, lay a secret, and she was quite determined to uncover it. Tuppence woke early the next morning, roused by the cry of seabirds and pale sunlight streaming through the gap in the curtains. Tommy still slept soundly, one arm flung across the pillow. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in her dressing gown, and went to the window. The gardens looked different in the morning light, less melancholy, more enchanted. Mist rose from the lake, and rabbits grazed unconcerned on the lawn. As she watched, a figure emerged from the trees bordering the property. Charles Warwick, carrying his easel and paint box, returning from what must have been an early morning expedition to the marshes. Something about the way he moved caught her attention. He wasn't walking toward the cottage, but toward the house, glancing about as though ensuring he wasn't observed. He disappeared around the corner toward the north wing. Tuppence dressed quickly, leaving a note for Tommy, and slipped downstairs. The house was quiet, though she could hear sounds from the kitchen where Mrs. Cook was no doubt preparing breakfast. She found her way to the north wing, guided by memory and instinct. The studio door stood slightly ajar. Through it, she could hear movement, the scrape of furniture, the rustle of canvas. She pushed the door open. The studio was a large, north-facing room with enormous windows designed to capture the consistent light artists favoured. Easels stood about, canvases were stacked against the walls, and the smell of oil paint and turpentine hung in the air. Charles Warwick stood before a covered canvas, his back to her. Mr. Warwick. He spun around, genuine surprise crossing his features. Mrs. Beresford, you're an early riser, as are you. Painting on the marshes? Attempting to capture the dawn light. It's quite extraordinary at this time of year. All those subtle gradations between darkness and day. He gestured to the canvas he'd been examining, which remained covered by a cloth. Colonel Ashford understood it. His marsh studies are exceptional." Tuppence moved into the room, studying the various paintings hung on the walls. Most were landscapes, windswept beaches, dramatic skies, the play of light on water. But in the corner, partially turned to the wall, was something different. She could see just enough to make out what appeared to be a portrait. "That's an unusual subject for Colonel Ashford," she observed. Warwick's expression became guarded. "Not all of these are the Colonel's work. Some are paintings I'm studying for my research. Various artists, various periods." "I see." Tuppence smiled pleasantly, but her mind was working rapidly. "You must have developed quite an expertise in authentication, knowing which paintings are genuine, which might be something else." A long pause followed. Warwick studied her with those intense artist's eyes. "You're very perceptive, Mrs. Beresford. Yes, authentication is part of my work. The art world has its share of mysteries, misattributions, forgeries, lost works that resurface in unexpected places." "How fascinating. And have you found anything unexpected at Willowmere?" "This is an old house with a long history. One might find all sorts of unexpected things if one knew where to look." He moved to stand between her and the turned portrait. "But I'm afraid I must finish my work here before breakfast. Perhaps we might continue this conversation another time." It was a dismissal, politely done but firm. Tuppence took the hint and returned to the main house, her mind churning with questions. Over breakfast, she recounted her encounter with Warwick to Tommy and Aunt Beatrice. Miss Crane listened with wide, anxious eyes, occasionally uttering small gasps of alarm. "He was definitely hiding something," Tuppence concluded. That covered canvas, the portrait turned to the wall, and his comments about finding unexpected things. It felt like a warning. "Or a boast," Tommy suggested. "Perhaps he's discovered something about the Colonel's paintings and wants to keep it to himself for his book." "Or perhaps," Beatrice said grimly, "he's stealing them, replacing valuable works with copies." "But why would he do that?" Miss Crane quavered. "Surely you'd notice if your paintings went missing." "Not if he's clever about it," Tommy said thoughtfully. "Switch a painting for a good copy, and who would know unless they examined it very closely, especially if the original isn't particularly famous." Tuppence buttered her toast, thinking, "We need to examine that portrait in the corridor more carefully, and perhaps find out what was in that spot originally." "The house records," Beatrice said suddenly. Herbert kept meticulous records of everything, including photographs of the interiors, taken years ago for insurance purposes. They're in his study. After breakfast, Beatrice led them to a book-lined room on the ground floor. She rummaged in a cabinet and produced a leather-bound album. "Here. These photographs were taken in 1935, just before Herbert died. He was very particular about documentation." They paged through the album, photographs of rooms, furniture, paintings. When they reached the portrait gallery, Tuppence drew in a sharp breath. "There," she pointed, "in the spot where Emily Ashford now hangs. That's a different portrait." The photograph, though faded, clearly showed a painting of a young woman with dark hair and a white dress, holding a spaniel. "Who is she?" Tommy asked. Beatrice peered at the photograph. I'm not certain. The image is rather small, but I have the feeling I should know." "Could we find the original portrait of Emily Ashford?" Tuppence asked. "The one now in the library." They trooped to the library, a comfortable room lined with glass-fronted bookcases. But though they searched every wall, they found no portrait matching the one in the east corridor. "It's not here," Beatrice said, bewildered. "Where could it have gone?" "Perhaps," Tommy said slowly, "it was never here. Perhaps the painting now hanging in the corridor isn't Emily Ashford at all. Perhaps it's the woman from the photograph, or a copy of her." But why would anyone go to such trouble? Miss Crane asked. That, Tuppence said, is exactly what we need to find out. That afternoon, while Tommy engaged Warwick in conversation about art techniques, Tuppence conducted her own investigation. She found Mrs. Cook in the kitchen, up to her elbows in flour as she prepared pastry. Mrs. Cook, how long have you been at Willowmere? 15 years, ma'am. Came here as cook when the old colonel was still alive. You must know the house very well. Have you noticed anything unusual recently? Mrs. Cook's hands paused in their kneading. Unusual how, ma'am? Oh, anything out of the ordinary. Strange noises, things moved, visitors at odd hours. The housekeeper resumed her work, but her expression had closed. Old houses make noises, ma'am. As for visitors, Mr. Warwick keeps irregular hours, but that's artists for you. And Miss Crane sometimes wanders at night when her nerves trouble her. What about the paintings? Have you ever noticed anything odd about them? I clean around them, ma'am, but I don't study them. Not my place. She shaped the pastry with firm, practiced movements. If you'll excuse me, I must get on with this pie. Tuppence left the kitchen feeling frustrated. Mrs. Cook knew something. She was certain of it, but the housekeeper's loyalty to her. Beatrice kept her silent. She was crossing the hall when she heard raised voices from above. Moving quietly up the stairs, she found herself outside Beatrice's private sitting room. The door was ajar. Simply won't tolerate this any longer. Beatrice's voice, sharp with anger. I understand your concern, but you must see reason. That was Warwick, his tone placating but with an edge beneath. The situation is more complex than you realize. I don't care about complexity. This is my home, my property. With respect, Mrs. Ashford, property rights can be surprisingly ambiguous when it comes to works of art, especially when there's a question of provenance. Are you threatening me? A pause. I'm simply suggesting that discretion would serve us both better than confrontation. Footsteps approached the door. Tuppence barely had time to slip into a window alcove before Warwick emerged, his face dark with suppressed emotion. He strode past without seeing her and disappeared down the stairs. When Tuppence entered the sitting room, she found Beatrice standing by the window, trembling with rage or fear, possibly both. Aunt Beatrice, what was that about? That man, Beatrice said through gritted teeth. He's not what he seems. He's not writing a book about East Anglian artists. Or if he is, it's not his real purpose here. What do you think his purpose is? I don't know, but I've asked him to leave. I've given him 1 week to finish his research and quit the cottage. She turned to face Tuppence, her eyes blazing. Whatever game he's playing, I won't have it played in my house. That night after dinner, Tommy and Tuppence took a walk in the gardens as the summer twilight lingered. They found themselves near the studio windows, which glowed with lamplight. He's working late again, Tuppence murmured. On impulse, they crept closer. Through the uncurtained window, they could see Warwick bending over a canvas, a magnifying glass in his hand, examining something with intense concentration. He's not painting, Tommy whispered. He's studying something. A painting? They watched for several minutes. Then Warwick straightened, set down the magnifying glass, and covered the canvas with a cloth. He stood very still for a moment, then ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration or triumph. As they hurried back toward the house, Tuppence clutched Tommy's arm. Did you see his face? He's found something important. The question is, Tommy said, what does he plan to do with it? They were so focused on their conversation that neither noticed the figure watching them from the shadow of the yew hedge. A dark silhouette that remained motionless long after they'd gone inside. staring at the studio windows with unreadable intent. The following morning dawned grey and drizzling, the kind of persistent English rain that settled in for the day. The house felt darker, the corridors more shadowed, and everyone's nerves seemed on edge. Tuppence found Miss Crane in the morning room, attempting to work on some embroidery, but mostly staring out at the rain-swept garden with distracted eyes. "Miss Crane, may I join you?" "Of course, Mrs. Beresford." The companion set aside her needlework with evident relief. "I'm not accomplishing much this morning, I'm afraid. My mind keeps wandering." Tuppence settled into the chair opposite. "I imagine all this business with Mr. Warwick has been unsettling." "Oh, it's not just Mr. Warwick." Miss Crane's fingers plucked nervously at her skirt, "though he does give me chills sometimes the way he looks at the paintings, as though he can see right through them to something hidden beneath." "What else troubles you?" Miss Crane hesitated, glancing toward the door as though ensuring they were truly alone. "Mrs. Beresford, do you believe houses can hold memories? Not ghosts precisely, but impressions of the past? I think old houses certainly have an atmosphere," Tuppence said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes in the East Corridor I feel as though something terrible happened there, something that left a mark." She twisted her handkerchief between her hands. "I know that sounds foolish. Not at all. Has Aunt Beatrice mentioned anything about the house's history? She speaks very little of the past. But I've gathered things over the years. The Colonel's first wife, for instance. Did you know he was married before?" This was news to Tuppence. "I had no idea. It was long ago, before the First War. She died young, some sort of accident, I believe. He remarried after the war, to your great-aunt. But sometimes I wonder." She trailed off. "Wonder what?" "If that's whose portrait used to hang in the corridor." "The first wife. Beatrice would have known her, of course. I think they were distantly related, but she never speaks of her." Before Tuppence could pursue this intriguing line of inquiry, Mrs. Cook appeared at the door. "Excuse me, Miss Crane, but Mrs. Ashford is asking for you. Something about the menus for the week." After Miss Crane had scurried away, Tuppence sat alone, thinking. A first wife dead under mysterious circumstances. A portrait that might have disappeared. And now, years later, someone very interested in the paintings. She found Tommy in the library, examining the bookshelves. "Tommy, did you know Colonel Ashford was married twice?" "No, but it's not uncommon for men of his generation." "Why?" she explained Miss Crane's hints. Tommy pulled out a leather-bound volume, a sheer county history from the shelves. "Let's see if we can find any mention of the family." They paged through the book until they found a section on notable Suffolk families. There, in small print, was a paragraph about the Ashfords of Willowmere. Colonel Herbert Ashford, born 1875, married first to Charlotte Pemberton in 1900. One son, James, born 1902, died in action 1918. Mrs. Ashford died 1914. Colonel Ashford married again in 1920 to Beatrice Courtenay. Who survives him? Charlotte Pemberton, Tuppence murmured. I wonder if that's who was in the portrait. But why would anyone want to remove or replace her portrait now, 70 years after her death? Unless, Tuppence said slowly, it has nothing to do with the person, and everything to do with the painting itself. That afternoon, they managed to corner Gedge the taxi driver when he came to deliver some parcels. Over tea in the kitchen, Mrs. Cook having reluctantly provided it, they extracted his memories of the Ashford family. Oh, I remember the Colonel well enough. Fine gentleman, though he had his troubles. Losing his boy in the war near broke him. And then there was the tragedy of his first wife. What happened to her? Tuppence asked. Gedge stirred his tea thoughtfully. It was ruled an accident. She fell from an upstairs window, the east corridor, as it happens, hit her head on the terrace below, killed instantly. He shook his head. Terrible business, some said. He glanced at Mrs. Cook, who stood at the sink with her back very straight and rigid. Said what? Tommy prompted. Well, there was talk. Village gossip, mind you. Nothing proved. But some said it weren't an accident. Said the Colonel and his wife had been quarrelling fierce that day, and that there was someone else involved. A young artist fellow who'd been painting her portrait. Tuppence felt a tingle run down her spine. An artist? Aye. Handsome lad by all accounts, though I never saw him myself. I was just a boy then. After Mrs. Charlotte died, he vanished. Went back to London, supposedly. The portrait he'd been working on was never finished. What was his name? Tommy asked. Can't recall. Something foreign sounding. Gedge drained his cup. Well, I must be off. Thanks for the tea, Mrs. Cook. After he'd gone, Tuppence turned to the housekeeper. Mrs. Cook, you knew about this? Mrs. Cook turned from the sink, her face impassive. It was all before my time, ma'am. I don't hold with gossip about the dead. But you must have heard things. Did Colonel Ashford ever speak of his first wife? Never. And Mrs. Ashford, the current Mrs. Ashford, made it clear when I came that the past was not to be discussed. She's a private lady, ma'am, and she's entitled to her peace, even if that peace is being disturbed by something connected to the past. Mrs. Cook's expression flickered. That Mr. Warwick, she said quietly. He's been asking questions too. About the Colonel, about Mrs. Charlotte, about paintings. I didn't like it, ma'am, and I told him so. Some things are better left buried. She turned back to her washing up, clearly ending the conversation. That evening, over sherry in the drawing-room before dinner, Tuppence broached the subject with Beatrice directly. Aunt Beatrice, I hope you won't think me impertinent, but we've learned something about the house's history, about Colonel Ashford's first wife. Beatrice's hand tightened on her sherry glass. Charlotte, what about her? We understand she died in an accident, in the East Corridor. Yes, Beatrice's voice was clipped. It was a long time ago, before you married the Colonel, several years before. I was a distant cousin of Charlotte's, actually. That's how I came to know Herbert. I visited after she died to help with the household. Later, after the war, when he was alone and grieving his son, she set down her glass. What has this to do with anything? There was a portrait, Tommy said gently. An artist was painting Charlotte before she died. Do you know what happened to it? Beatrice stood abruptly and walked to the window. When she spoke again, her voice was strained. The portrait was never completed. After Charlotte's death, Herbert couldn't bear to look at it. He had it removed, stored somewhere, or perhaps destroyed. I never asked. Is it possible, Tuppence ventured, that it's still in the house, that someone might have found it? Why would anyone care about an unfinished portrait of a woman dead these many years? Perhaps, Tommy said, it's not the subject that matters, but the painting itself, or what might be hidden beneath it. Beatrice turned to stare at him. Hidden? What do you mean? It's not uncommon for artists to paint over old canvases, or for valuable paintings to be concealed beneath later work. If someone suspected that Charlotte's portrait, or another painting in the house, concealed something valuable. You're suggesting someone is searching for a hidden painting? Here at Willowmere? Beatrice sank back into her chair. But who would even know about such a thing? As if in answer, footsteps sounded in the hall, and Charles Warwick appeared at the door. Forgive the interruption, he said, his eyes moving from face to face, clearly sensing the tension. Mrs. Ashford, I need to speak with you, urgently. It's about the portrait in the East Corridor. I believe I know what it really is. The room fell silent. Outside, the rain drummed harder against the windows, and somewhere in the house, a door slammed with a sound like a gunshot. They gathered in the East Corridor, an unlikely assembly united by curiosity and unease. The portrait of the woman in the blue dress gazed down at them with her enigmatic half-smile, illuminated by the flickering lamplight. Warwick stood before it, his face grave. "This painting," he began, "is not what it appears to be." "Explain yourself," Beatrice demanded, though her voice trembled slightly. "First, let me ask, has this house ever been inventoried by a professional art appraiser? Not in my time. Herbert had his paintings valued for insurance in the 30s, but nothing since." Warwick nodded slowly. "Mrs. Ashford, I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my purpose here. Yes, I'm researching a book on East Anglian artists, but I'm also working for a gallery in London. We specialize in recovering lost works. Paintings that have gone missing over the years, through theft, misattribution, or simply being forgotten." "And," Tommy prompted, "6 months ago we received a letter from an elderly man in Norfolk. He claimed that in his youth he'd worked briefly as an assistant to an artist named Edward Torrance. Have you heard the name?" Beatrice frowned. "Vaguely. Wasn't he a portraitist before the First War? More than that. He was considered a rising star, a potential rival to John Singer Sargent. But his career ended abruptly in 1914 when he was accused of theft. He'd been commissioned to paint a portrait of a wealthy manufacturer's wife in London. The painting was completed and delivered, but within a month, the manufacturer claimed it was a forgery. A copy Torrance had substituted for the original." "What happened?" Tuppence asked, fascinated. "Torrance was ruined. He couldn't prove the painting was genuine, and the scandal destroyed him. He died penniless in 1920, his reputation in tatters. But this elderly assistant insisted Torrance had been innocent. He claimed Torrance had hidden his finest works, hoping someday to prove his worth." Warwick turned back to the portrait. He mentioned several possible locations, including Willowmere House. He said Torrance had painted here in 1914, working on a commission that was never completed. "Charlotte," Beatrice whispered. "He was the artist painting Charlotte." "Exactly." According to the assistant's letter, Torrance was terrified that his enemies, those who'd accused him of forgery, might track him down and destroy his remaining work. So he did something clever. He hid his most valuable painting beneath another portrait, one that wouldn't attract attention. Tommy examined the painting more closely. "You think the Charlotte Pemberton portrait is underneath this image of Emily Ashford?" "I don't think this is the Emily Ashford portrait at all," Warwick said. "I think this is a cheap copy, painted over the Torrance portrait to conceal it. And I think the real Emily Ashford portrait, the one photographed in the library, was moved here to take its place originally." "Wait," Tuppence said, her mind racing. "You're saying someone decades ago switched the paintings, hid the Torrance portrait and made it look like a family picture?" "Precisely. It would have taken someone who knew the house intimately, someone who had access and could make such changes without drawing attention." "The Colonel," Beatrice said slowly. "Herbert must have done it. After Charlotte died, after Torrance left. He wanted to preserve the portrait but couldn't bear to look at it, so he hid it in plain sight. A Torrance portrait, if authenticated, could be worth a considerable sum." Warwick continued. "His work is extremely rare now. This could be one of the last existing examples." Tommy studied the painting with new eyes. "How can you be sure?" "I'm not entirely. But look at the frame. It's been cleaned recently. Possibly when the switch was made back to this painting. The brushwork has the characteristics of Torrance's style, and—" He reached up and carefully lifted the frame away from the wall. "There are marks here suggesting X-ray examination. Someone else has been investigating this painting." "What?" Beatrice's voice was sharp. "When?" "Impossible to say for certain. but within the last few months, I'd estimate. A cold silence fell over the group. Tuppence was the first to speak. You're saying someone else knows about this? Someone else has been here examining the painting? It would appear so. The question is, who? They reconvened in the drawing room, where the fire had been lit against the damp chill. Miss Crane brought tea, her hands shaking so badly that the cups rattled in their saucers. "This is quite beyond anything," she murmured. "Hidden paintings, stolen works. It's like something from a novel." "It's very real, I'm afraid," Warwick said. "The question now is what to do about it. If we remove the overpaint, we might destroy evidence. But if we leave it, whoever else is searching for it might take more drastic action. Whoever else." Beatrice's voice was sharp. "Who are you suggesting?" "I don't know. But someone has been in this house examining that painting. Someone who knows what to look for and has the tools to do so. Not a casual thief, an expert." Tommy had been standing by the fireplace, lost in thought. Now he turned to them. "Mrs. Cook, when did she come to Willowmere?" 15 years ago, Beatrice replied. "I don't see. And before that, she worked for a family in London, I believe. She had excellent references." "Which family?" Beatrice frowned, trying to remember. "The Hendersons, I think. Or was it Henshaw? I'd have to check her employment records." "Do that," Tommy said. "Tonight. And in the meantime, I think we should keep a very close watch on that painting. If someone else is after it, they may try again soon, especially if they know we're on to them." "I'll sleep in the corridor," Warwick offered. "I can set up a cot near the portrait. No one will touch it without my knowing." Beatrice nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but I want answers, Mr. Warwick. And I want them soon." Late that night, Tuppence couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Tommy's steady breathing and the sounds of the old house settling. Rain still pattered against the windows. Somewhere below, a clock chimed 2. Then she heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard outside their room. She slipped out of bed and moved to the door, opening it a crack. The corridor was dark, but she could make out a figure moving quietly toward the stairs. Not Warwick. He was supposed to be sleeping near the portrait. This was someone smaller, moving with careful stealth. Tuppence grabbed her dressing gown and followed. The figure descended the main staircase and turned toward the east wing. Tuppence kept well back, using the shadows for cover. When she reached the portrait gallery, she saw Miss Crane standing before the painting of the woman in blue, a candle in her trembling hand. Miss Crane. The companion spun around with a gasp, nearly dropping the candle. "Mrs. Beresford, oh, you gave me such a fright. What are you doing here?" I couldn't sleep. I often walk when my nerves trouble me." But her eyes were fixed on the painting, and there was something in her expression, a mixture of fear and fascination, that belied her casual explanation. "You know something about this painting," Tuppence said quietly. "Don't you?" Miss Crane's face crumpled. "I should never have come here. I should have stayed in London, kept my peace. But when I heard Mrs. Ashford needed a companion, when I saw the advertisement, I thought perhaps what? That I might find it. The painting my father spoke of before he died. He was Edward Torrance's assistant, you see, the elderly man who wrote to the gallery." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He died 6 months ago, still insisting his master had been innocent, still claiming that somewhere, hidden away, was proof of Torrance's genius." Tuppence felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold corridor. "You're Torrance's assistant's daughter? You came here deliberately?" "I didn't know for certain the painting was here, but Father mentioned Willowmere, and when I saw the position advertised, I thought I might look quietly, for Father's sake, to clear his master's name. Have you examined the painting?" Miss Crane nodded miserably. "I borrowed equipment from a friend in London. A portable X-ray device. That's what Mr. Warwick must have detected. I did it one night when everyone was asleep. And I saw it, Mrs. Beresford. Beneath that insipid portrait, there's another painting. A masterpiece. Why didn't you tell Mrs. Ashford?" "Because I'm not the only one looking." Miss Crane's voice dropped to a whisper. "There are others. People who knew of the rumour. People who would stop at nothing to acquire a lost Torrance." She clutched Tuppence's arm. "You must be careful. Someone here is not what they seem. Someone is waiting for the right moment to take the painting and disappear, and they won't let anyone stand in their way." Before Tuppence could respond, a shout echoed from the far end of the corridor. They ran toward it, Miss Crane's candle throwing wild shadows on the walls. They found Charles Warwick lying on the floor near his improvised cot, a dark stain spreading across his temple. The frame where the portrait should have hung stood empty. The painting was gone. The house erupted into chaos. Tommy arrived hastily dressed, followed by Beatrice in her dressing gown, and finally Mrs. Cook and her husband roused from their cottage. Someone had the presence of mind to telephone for Dr. Hammond from the village and, less helpfully, for Constable Briggs. Warwick regained consciousness before the doctor arrived, pressing a hand to his bleeding temple and looking furious. "I never even heard them," he said through gritted teeth. "One moment I was drowsing on the cot, the next, crack, and I was on the floor. When I came to, the painting was gone." "Did you see anything, anyone?" Tommy asked. "A shadow, perhaps. Someone in dark clothing. I tried to cry out, but—" He winced as Tuppence applied a cold compress to his head. Dr. Hammond, when he arrived, proclaimed the injury not serious. A nasty blow, but no concussion. He bandaged Warwick's head and prescribed rest. Constable Briggs, a stolid man in his 50s who clearly wished to be back in his bed, took statements and examined the empty frame with pessimistic thoroughness. "Art theft, is it?" He scratched his head. "Can't say we see much of that in these parts. Usually it's poached rabbits or disputes about right-of-way. I'll need to report this to Ipswich. They'll want to send a detective." "How long will that take?" Beatrice asked. "Day or two, I expect. In the meantime, I'd advise you all to lock your doors and windows. Whoever did this might still be about." After the constable had departed with a warning to touch nothing, the remaining household gathered in the drawing room. Dawn was breaking outside, grey and dismal. "Well," Tommy said, "let's review what we know. Someone struck Mr. Warwick and stole the painting. The question is, was it an outsider or someone in this house? It can't be one of us." Miss Crane protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Let's consider the possibilities," Tuppence said. "Mrs. Cook and her husband were in their cottage. Miss Crane and I were together in the corridor. We can vouch for each other." "That leaves me," Beatrice said flatly. "You think I stole my own painting and assaulted Mr. Warwick?" "Of course not," Tommy said quickly. "But we must consider all angles. Where were you when you heard the shout?" "In my room. I was reading. I often have insomnia. I came as soon as I heard the commotion." "So, any of us could theoretically have slipped out, attacked Warwick, and hidden the painting before discovering the crime." Tuppence mused. "Or it could have been an outsider who knew the house layout." "There's another possibility," Warwick said quietly. "The painting could have been stolen by arrangement. Someone inside working with someone outside." A heavy silence greeted this suggestion. "I won't have such accusations in my house," Beatrice said, though she looked shaken. "We must wait for the police detective from Ipswich. Surely they'll sort this out." But when they dispersed to their rooms, none of them eager to return to sleep, Tuppence caught Tommy's arm. "Tommy, I need to tell you something," About Miss Crane. She recounted her midnight encounter and Miss Crane's confession. Tommy's expression grew grave. So she's been deceiving everyone from the start. Came here with a hidden agenda. But does that make her a thief? She seemed genuinely distressed about the painting being stolen. Perhaps, or perhaps she's a very good actress. Tommy moved to the window, watching the grey dawn light spread across the gardens. There's something else troubling me. That blow to Warwick's head was carefully calculated. Hard enough to knock him out, but not to kill. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. What are you suggesting? That this might be more than simple theft. Someone is playing a deeper game. The morning brought unexpected developments. At breakfast, a tense affair with everyone eyeing each other with suspicion. A telegram arrived for Beatrice. She read it twice, her face paling. "It's from my solicitor in London," she said. "He says there's been an inquiry about Willowmere's ownership and the contents of Herbert's will. Someone has been researching the house's legal status." "Who?" Tommy asked sharply. "He doesn't say, but he warns me to be careful about any claims on the property or its contents." "Claims?" Tuppence frowned. "What sort of claims?" "I'm not certain, but Herbert's will was complicated. There were provisions for his son James, who died in the war, and there was something about Charlotte's family. Some dispute over items she'd brought to the marriage." Beatrice set down the telegram with a shaking hand. "I never paid much attention to the details. The solicitors handled it all." "Could someone be claiming ownership of the paintings?" Tommy suggested. "It's possible, I suppose. Charlotte was a Pemberton, and the Pembertons were an old Suffolk family. Perhaps they feel entitled to her portrait. Or to a valuable painting hidden beneath it," Warwick added grimly. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. The detective from Ipswich telephoned to say he'd been delayed. A motor accident on the London road, and wouldn't arrive until the following day. Mrs. Cook prepared lunch and dinner as usual, but the meals were eaten in near silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Tuppence spent the afternoon in the library, paging through old county records and family histories, looking for any connection that might explain the mystery. Tommy, meanwhile, conducted a thorough search of the grounds with Mr. Cook, looking for signs of an intruder or a hiding place for the stolen painting. They found nothing. As evening drew in, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. Miss Crane retired early with a headache. Warwick retreated to the studio, claiming he needed to work to settle his nerves. Beatrice sat in the drawing room, staring into the fire. Tuppence was about to suggest an early night, when Mrs. Cook appeared at the door. Her usual composure shattered. "Mrs. Ashford, ma'am, you must come. It's in the studio. Something terrible." They rushed to the north wing, Mrs. Cook leading the way with a lamp. The studio door stood open. Inside, paintings had been pulled from their stacks and scattered across the floor. Canvases had been slashed, frames broken. It was wanton destruction, and in the centre of it all, pinned to an easel with a knife, was a note written in block capitals. "Stop looking. This is your only warning." Beatrice swayed, and Tommy caught her arm. Tuppence stared at the destruction, her mind racing. "Where's Mr. Warwick?" she asked suddenly. They found him in the cottage, his few belongings hastily packed. He looked up as they entered, his expression grim. "I'm leaving," he announced. "First thing in the morning. This has gone beyond scholarly research or art recovery. Someone is willing to resort to violence, and I won't risk my life for a painting, no matter how valuable. You can't leave," Beatrice protested. "The police will want to question you." "The police can find me in London. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not staying here to become the next victim." He gestured to his bandaged head. "I've already had one warning. I'm not waiting for another. What about the painting? Tuppence asked. Don't you want to see this through? Warwick's laugh was bitter. The painting is gone, Mrs. Beresford. Stolen by someone who knew exactly what they were after and wasn't afraid to use force to get it. Whoever has it now will either try to sell it quietly or destroy it to cover their tracks. Either way, it's beyond our reach. After they'd left him to his packing, Tommy and Tuppence walked slowly back to the main house through the gathering dusk. He's frightened, Tuppence said, genuinely frightened. Can you blame him? Someone has shown they're willing to use violence. That note was quite clear. But who, Tommy? Who would go to such lengths? Someone who believes the painting is worth it, or someone who has a more personal stake in keeping it hidden? Tommy paused at the edge of the terrace, looking up at the dark bulk of the house. We're missing something, Tuppence. Some piece of the puzzle that would make everything clear. As if in answer, a scream echoed from inside the house, high, terrified, and unmistakably Miss Crane's voice. They ran. They found Miss Crane on the first-floor landing, pressed against the wall, pointing with a shaking hand toward her bedroom door, which stood ajar. Someone was in my room, she gasped. I saw them, a figure in dark clothing going through my things. When I cried out, they pushed past me and ran down the servants' stairs. Tommy immediately gave chase, thundering down the narrow back staircase. But by the time he reached the ground floor, the intruder had vanished into the maze of service corridors. He returned to find Tuppence and Beatrice comforting the distraught Miss Crane. Did you see their face? Tuppence asked. No, they wore some kind of dark covering. But their build, they were slight, not tall, and they moved quickly, like someone young. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged glances. Not a description that fit anyone in the household particularly well, unless someone was deliberately disguising their usual manner of movement. An examination of Miss Crane's room revealed the intruder's purpose. Her small writing desk had been ransacked, papers strewn everywhere. Her handbag had been emptied, its contents scattered across the bed. They were looking for something, Tuppence said, surveying the chaos. Something small enough to keep in a desk or handbag. Papers? Keys? Miss Crane sank onto the bed, her face pale. My father's letter, the one he wrote before he died, describing where he thought Torrance might have hidden his paintings. It was in my desk, was? Tommy asked sharply. It's gone. They took it. What did the letter say exactly? Tuppence prompted. Miss Crane closed her eyes, trying to remember. Father mentioned several locations. He wasn't certain, you understand? It was all speculation based on things Torrance had said years ago. But he specifically mentioned Willowmere because Torrance had painted here in 1914, and he'd said something cryptic about hiding truth in plain sight and portraits within portraits. Did he mention any other details? Names, dates, specific locations in the house? He said Torrance had spoken of a woman in a blue dress, that the painting he was most proud of, his masterwork, showed a woman in a blue dress holding something. Father thought it might be Charlotte Ashford, but he wasn't certain. Holding something. Tommy leaned forward. What? He didn't know, but he thought it was significant. A clue, perhaps, to other hidden works. Torrance apparently liked puzzles, codes. He thought of himself as clever. Miss Crane twisted her handkerchief. That's why Father believed the paintings might still be found. Torrance wouldn't have simply hidden them. He'd have left trails, hints, ways for them to be recovered if one were clever enough. Tuppence stood and moved to the window. Outside, the night was fully dark now, and a wind had risen, sending clouds scudding across the moon. So we have a missing painting that may contain not only valuable art, but also clues to other hidden works. And now someone has your father's letter, which means they know what we know. Or Tommy said thoughtfully. They wanted to confirm what they suspected, to make sure no one else had information they lacked. Tommy, are you suggesting the person who stole the painting and the person who ransacked this room are the same? It seems likely. This feels coordinated, planned. Someone working methodically to gather the painting and all information about it. But who? Beatrice's voice was strained. Mr. Warwick is leaving. Mrs. Cook has been with me for 15 years. Miss Crane is the victim here, and surely you can't suspect me. What about Mr. Cook? Tuppence suggested. He has access to the house, knows its layout, and we've barely spoken to him. Albert? Beatrice looked doubtful. He's a simple man. Gardening and repairs are his life. I can't imagine him involved in art theft. Nevertheless, Tommy said, I think we should speak with him. They found Mr. Cook in the kitchen, sharing a pot of tea with his wife. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with calloused hands and a weather-beaten face. The very picture of an honest English gardener. But as Tommy questioned him about his movements the previous night, Tuppence noticed Mrs. Cook's expression growing increasingly pinched. I was in the cottage all night, Cook said steadily. Went to bed at 9 as always. Heard nothing unusual until all the shouting about the painting. And you, Mrs. Cook? Tuppence asked. Did you hear anything? No, ma'am. I sleep sound. Have either of you noticed strangers about the property recently? Anyone showing unusual interest in the house or its contents? The Cooks exchanged glances. Finally, Mrs. Cook spoke. There was someone a few weeks back, young woman she was, asking questions in the village about Willowmere. Wanted to know about the history of the house, the family. What did she look like? 30-ish, well-dressed, city manner about her. Said she was researching local history, but... Mrs. Cook shrugged. Something felt off. Did you tell Mrs. Ashford? Didn't seem important at the time. We get the occasional historian or artist type asking questions. After leaving the kitchen, Tommy said quietly to Tuppence, They're hiding something, both of them. I think so too. But what? They decided to conduct their own search of the house, starting with the studio. Despite the destruction, they moved carefully through the debris, examining each damaged painting, each scattered sketch. Look at this, Tommy said, holding up a canvas that had been slashed. This is one of Colonel Ashford's marsh studies. Why would someone destroy it? Unless they were looking for something hidden behind it, Tuppence suggested. She knelt and began checking other damaged works. Tommy, these have all been cut away from their frames. Someone was checking the backs of the canvases. For what? Other hidden paintings? Or for something hidden inside the frames themselves? Tuppence picked up a broken frame, examining it closely. These are old frames, probably original to the paintings. What if Torrance, or the Colonel, hid something in them? Documents, perhaps, or clues to other locations? They spent the next hour carefully examining every frame in the studio, checking for hidden compartments or papers. They found nothing. Discouraged, they returned to the house proper. As they passed through the portrait gallery, now looking oddly bare with its one empty frame, Tuppence stopped suddenly. Tommy, look at the other portraits. Really look at them. They walked slowly down the corridor, examining each painting. Most were unremarkable. Competent but uninspired family portraits spanning 2 centuries. But 3 paintings made Tuppence pause. All were of women. All wore blue dresses, and all held objects. A book, a flower, a letter. Could any of these be Torrance paintings? She wondered aloud. Let's check the frames. Tommy carefully examined each one, running his fingers along the edges, checking for signs of tampering or recent cleaning. At the 3rd portrait, a woman in her 30s with dark hair, holding a sealed letter, he made a small sound of discovery. Tuppence, this frame. It's been modified, see here? These corners have been carefully pried open and resealed. Working together, they managed to ease the frame apart slightly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a piece of paper. With trembling hands, Tuppence unfolded it. The paper was yellowed with age, covered in spidery handwriting. "It's a letter," she breathed, "from Charlotte Ashford to her husband, dated June 1914. They read it together. "My dearest Herbert, I am writing this in haste, as I fear I may not have another opportunity. I must tell you what I have discovered about Mr. Torrance and his paintings. He is not what he seems. The portrait he is creating is actually—" The letter ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. "She knew something," Tommy said. "Something about Torrance and his work. Something she was trying to tell her husband before—" "Before she died," Tuppence finished grimly. "Tommy, what if Charlotte's death wasn't an accident? What if she was killed because of what she knew?" Before Tommy could respond, they heard rapid footsteps. Gedge the taxi driver appeared, breathless. "Mr. Beresford, ma'am, you must come quickly. There's been an accident on the Marsh Road. A car went into the water. They've pulled out the driver." "Who?" Tuppence asked, though something in her already knew. "Mr. Warwick, ma'am. He was trying to leave, but the road was treacherous in the dark. His car went straight into the dike." Gedge's face was grim. "He's alive, but barely. The doctor's with him now. But before he lost consciousness, he kept saying something, kept repeating it over and over." "What did he say?" Tommy demanded. "Tell them it's a fake." "That's what he said. Tell the Beresfords it's a fake." "What do you suppose he meant by that?" Tuppence and Tommy looked at each other in the dim light of the portrait gallery, the stolen painting's empty frame looming behind them like a question mark. "I think," Tuppence said slowly, "that Mr. Warwick just told us the most important clue of all, and someone was willing to kill to keep him from telling us in person." By morning, the house was in an uproar. The police had arrived in force from Ipswich. Detective Inspector Marsh, a sharp-eyed man with a military bearing, along with 2 constables. Warwick had been taken to hospital in Ipswich. His condition serious but stable, and a search of his cottage had yielded interesting results. "Chemical supplies," Inspector Marsh informed them, laying out evidence on the dining room table. "Solvents, X-ray equipment, specialized tools for canvas analysis." Mr. Warwick was equipped for serious art investigation or art forgery. "Surely you don't suspect him of the theft?" Beatrice protested. "He was the one attacked. Perhaps. Or perhaps that was staged." Marsh's expression was non-committal. "I've telephoned London. Mr. Warwick's gallery exists, but they claim he's not currently working for them. In fact, he left their employment under something of a cloud 6 months ago." "What sort of cloud?" Tommy asked. Questions about the authenticity of certain paintings he'd acquired for them. Nothing proven, but enough to make them wary. Tuppence was about to respond when Mrs. Cook entered, her face strained. "Inspector, there's something I need to tell you. About the night the painting was stolen." Everyone turned to stare at her. "I wasn't entirely truthful before. I was awake that night. I often am. My joints trouble me. And I saw someone crossing the garden from the cottage toward the house. It was around 1 in the morning. "Who?" Marsh demanded. "I couldn't make out their face clearly, but they were carrying something, a bag or satchel. They went into the house through the scullery door." "Why didn't you investigate or raise an alarm?" Mrs. Cook's face reddened. "Because I thought it was Miss Crane. She often walks at night when she can't sleep, and I knew she had keys to the scullery. I didn't want to embarrass her by mentioning it." Miss Crane gasped. "You thought I—" "Mrs. Cook, I was in my room all night until Mrs. Beresford found me in the corridor." "That's right," Tuppence confirmed. and I can vouch for her from approximately 1:30 onward." "So someone else was in the house," Tommy said. "Someone who knew where the keys were kept and how to move through the house without being heard." Inspector Marsh turned to Beatrice. "Mrs. Ashford, I need a complete list of everyone who has access to this house. Staff, visitors, former employees, anyone who might have keys or detailed knowledge of the layout." As Beatrice went to fetch her records, Tuppence pulled Tommy aside. "Tommy, what did Warwick mean when he said it's a fake? The stolen painting or something else? I've been thinking about that. What if the painting stolen from the corridor was already a copy? What if the real Torrance masterpiece, if it ever existed, is somewhere else entirely? But then why steal a copy? Unless—" Tuppence's eyes widened. "Unless the thief didn't know it was a copy. Unless they were operating on incomplete information. Exactly. And now they have a worthless fake, while the real painting remains hidden." "If it exists at all," Tommy cautioned. "We're still making a lot of assumptions, are we?" Tuppence pulled out Charlotte's unfinished letter. Charlotte knew something about Torrance and his paintings, something she was trying to tell her husband. What if she discovered that Torrance was creating multiple versions of his works? Genuine originals and deliberate copies. It would explain the forgery scandal that ruined him. But why would an artist create fake versions of his own work? Insurance? To protect the originals? Or perhaps— Tuppence paused, thinking. Perhaps as a kind of test, a way to identify true connoisseurs from mere collectors. If you know what to look for, you can tell the difference. Then what should we be looking for? Before Tuppence could answer, Inspector Marsh called them back to the dining room. The household had been assembled. Beatrice, Miss Crane, the cooks, and even Gedge, who'd been asked to remain available for questioning. "I think," Tommy said quietly to Tuppence, "it's time we put forward our theory. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be." They returned to the dining room, where Marsh stood with his arms folded, waiting. "Inspector," Tommy began, "I believe we can shed some light on this matter, but it requires going back to 1914, to the death of Charlotte Ashford." A murmur ran through the assembled group. Beatrice leaned forward, her face pale. "Charlotte's death was ruled an accident," Tommy continued, "but I believe it was murder. She discovered something about Edward Torrance's paintings, something dangerous enough to kill for." "That's preposterous," Beatrice said faintly. "Is it? Consider the facts. Torrance was accused of forgery, of substituting a fake for a genuine commissioned work. But what if that accusation was false? What if someone else made the substitution and let Torrance take the blame? Who? Marsh demanded. Someone with access to the painting. Someone who knew enough about art to create a convincing copy. Someone who stood to gain from both acquiring a valuable original and destroying Torrance's reputation. Tuppence took up the thread. Charlotte was sitting for her portrait when she discovered the truth. Perhaps she saw Torrance creating multiple versions, or found sketches, or overheard conversations. Whatever she learned, she tried to tell her husband. But before she could, she died. Pushed from the window, I believe, though it was made to look like an accident. By whom? Beatrice's voice was barely a whisper. By the person who had the most to lose from Charlotte's revelation. The person who was in the house that day, who had the opportunity, and who has been searching ever since for what Torrance hid here. Tommy turned to face the assembly. "Mrs. Cook, your maiden name was Henderson, wasn't it?" The housekeeper's face went rigid. "What of it? The Henderson family employed you in London before you came here. They were also the family whose portrait Torrance was accused of forging. Your uncle, I believe, was the manufacturer who made that accusation. That's just coincidence, is it? You came to Willowmere 15 years ago, ostensibly as a housekeeper. But really, you came to search for something. The original Torrance painting. The one your uncle stole and replaced with a copy. He destroyed Torrance's reputation. But the artist got his revenge by hiding the original where your uncle could never find it. Mrs. Cook's composure cracked. You can't prove any of this. Actually, Tuppence said gently, we can. You see, you made one crucial mistake. When you stole the painting from the corridor, you didn't realize it was already a fake. A copy that Colonel Ashford had commissioned to replace the original after Charlotte's death. He suspected the truth, you see, even if he couldn't prove it. So he hid the real Torrance masterpiece somewhere else and put a copy in its place as bait. Where is the real painting? Marsh asked. Tommy smiled. I believe I know. Colonel Ashford was a clever man. He hid the truth in plain sight, just as Torrance would have done. The portrait gallery has several paintings of women in blue dresses. One of them, the one Miss Crane overlooked in her X-ray examination, contains the real Torrance masterpiece underneath. And I think I know which one. He walked to the corridor and returned with the painting they'd examined the previous night. The woman holding the sealed letter. This one. The frame has been modified to hold Charlotte's letter, her testimony to what she knew. And beneath this competent but unremarkable family portrait is, I believe, the painting everyone has been searching for. Inspector Marsh called for an art expert from Cambridge. It took 2 days for the examination to be completed, but in the end, Tommy's theory was proven correct. Beneath the Victorian family portrait lay a stunning work by Edward Torrance, a portrait of Charlotte Ashford in a blue dress, holding not a letter, but a small card bearing a series of numbers. It's a code, the art expert explained. Coordinates, perhaps, or a combination. Torrance loved puzzles. This card likely references the locations of his other hidden works. Mrs. Cook broke down when confronted with the evidence. She confessed to decades of searching, to ransacking Miss Crane's room, to following Warwick and attempting to frighten him into abandoning his research. She had not, however, tampered with his car. That had been a genuine accident, the result of unfamiliarity with the marsh roads and panic at fleeing with what she'd thought was the valuable painting. I didn't kill Charlotte Ashford, she insisted through tears. That was my uncle's doing. I was young then, newly in service to his family. But I knew what he'd done, and I helped him hide it. When he died, he made me promise to find the original painting. Said it was worth a fortune, and rightfully his. I've been searching for 15 years, and now... She broke off, sobbing. And now, Inspector Marsh said grimly, and you'll be charged with theft, assault, and conspiracy to conceal a murder. The resolution of Mrs. Cook's arrest brought a strange calm to Willowmere House, but it was the calm before a final storm. That evening, as the inspector prepared to return to Ipswich with his prisoner, a telegram arrived from London. Inspector Marsh read it, his expression darkening. This changes things, he muttered, then looked up at the assembled household. It seems Mrs. Cook was not working entirely alone. The gallery that employed Warwick has connections to several art fraud cases. They've been using researchers like him to locate valuable works, then substituting forgeries. The genuine pieces enter the black market. But Warwick was injured, Beatrice protested. Nearly killed in that car accident. A genuine accident, as I said. But it doesn't mean he's innocent of the larger scheme. In fact, Marsh was interrupted by the telephone ringing. When he answered it, his face went rigid. I see, yes, we'll be ready. He hung up and turned to them. That was the hospital. Warwick has discharged himself against medical advice. He's disappeared. "He's coming here," Tommy said with certainty. "He knows we found the real painting. He'll make one last attempt to get it." "I've left 2 constables outside," Marsh said, "but if he's desperate, then we'll be ready for him," Tuppence declared. As night fell, they prepared. The painting, now carefully removed from its frame and the Torrance masterpiece revealed, was placed in the drawing room, deliberately visible through the uncurtained windows. Tommy and Inspector Marsh positioned themselves in the shadows, while Tuppence and Beatrice waited by the fire, pretending to examine the discovery. The constables patrolled outside, but Willowmere's grounds were extensive, its gardens full of shadows and hiding places. They didn't have to wait long. At 10 o'clock, a soft sound came from the French windows leading to the terrace. A shadow moved outside. Then, with a sharp crack, the latch gave way, and Charles Warwick stepped into the room. He looked terrible, his head still bandaged, his face drawn with pain and desperation, but his eyes were fixed on the painting with an intensity that was almost frightening. "Mr. Warwick," Tuppence said calmly, though her heart was pounding, "I thought you were in hospital." "Don't move," he said, and they saw the gun in his hand, small but deadly. "I'm taking that painting. I've worked too long, risked too much to lose it now." "You'll never get away," Tommy said, emerging from the shadows. Inspector Marsh appeared on the other side, blocking the door. Warwick laughed, a harsh, desperate sound. "You think I haven't planned for this? There's a boat waiting at the creek. By morning I'll be in France with a masterpiece worth hundreds of thousands of pounds." "Is it worth a murder charge?" Tuppence asked. "Because that's what you'll face. Charlotte Ashford's death can now be proven as murder, and you've become an accessory after the fact." "I had nothing to do with that. That was 50 years ago. But you knew about it. The gallery you worked for knew. They've been systematically looting country houses, targeting families who inherited valuable art without knowing its worth. How many paintings have you stolen, Mr. Warwick? How many people have you deceived? I don't have time for this conversation." He gestured with the gun toward the painting. "Mrs. Ashford, wrap that up carefully. If you damage it, I won't hesitate to—" He never finished the sentence. Gedge, the taxi driver, appeared at the open French windows behind Warwick, moving with surprising stealth for a man his age. Before Warwick could react, Gedge had grabbed his gun arm, twisting it expertly. The gun clattered to the floor. Tommy immediately grabbed it as Inspector Marsh snapped handcuffs on Warwick's wrists. "Gedge!" Tuppence exclaimed. "Where did you come from?" The taxi driver smiled grimly. "Been keeping watch outside, ma'am. I remembered Mr. Warwick asking me about the grounds, the creek, the boat landing. Seemed suspicious at the time, though I didn't think much of it. And I served in the war. Still remember a thing or two about hand-to-hand combat," as Marsh led Warwick. Away, the art thief still protesting his innocence and insisting he was the victim of a larger conspiracy. The remaining household members gradually relaxed. Miss Crane, who had watched the whole scene from the doorway with wide, terrified eyes, now came forward to examine the painting more closely. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Father would have been so proud. He always insisted Mr. Torrance was innocent, that his work would be vindicated some day." "Thanks to your father's letter, it has been," Tuppence said gently. "Without his clues, we might never have found it." "What will happen to the painting now?" Beatrice asked. Inspector Marsh, returning from securing his prisoner in the waiting police car, overheard the question. "That will be for the courts to decide, I'm afraid. There are questions of ownership. Was it Colonel Ashford's property? Or does it belong to Torrance's estate? Or possibly to the original commissioner? It could take years to sort out." Beatrice looked at the portrait of Charlotte, her husband's first wife, captured at the height of her beauty and vitality, forever young in Torrance's masterful brushwork. "I think," she said slowly, "that it should go to a museum. Let the public see it. Let Torrance's genius be recognized at last. That seems the fitting end to this story." "A generous decision," Tommy said approvingly. "Perhaps, but I have no wish to keep secrets any longer. This house has held too many for too long." Beatrice turned to face them all. Miss Crane, the Beresfords, Gedge. "Thank you, all of you, for your courage and your cleverness. Herbert would have been proud." As the police car drove away with its prisoners, taking Mrs. Cook and Warwick to face justice, Tuppence stood on the terrace looking out over the darkened gardens towards the invisible marsh beyond. "Tommy," she said thoughtfully, "there's still one thing I don't understand." Tommy came to stand beside her. "You're doing better than I am." Charlotte's letter mentioned she was going to tell her husband something about Torrance and his paintings, but it ended mid-sentence. We assumed she was interrupted by her killer. But what if she finished the letter? What if there's a second page we haven't found? After all this, you want to keep searching? Not searching exactly, just thinking. She turned to him with that familiar gleam in her eye. Because the numbers on that card in the painting, those coordinates or combinations or whatever they are, suggest there are more Torrance paintings hidden somewhere. And if we could find them— "Tuppence," Tommy said firmly, though he was smiling, "we are going home tomorrow. We are going to have a quiet month, as we originally planned. No mysteries, no danger, no hidden paintings." "Of course, darling. Absolutely. I quite agree," she paused, "though it wouldn't hurt to stop at the British Museum on our way home, just to see if they have any records of Torrance's commissions. Purely academic interest, you understand." Tommy sighed, but he was still smiling as he took her arm and led her back into the house. After 20 years of marriage, he knew when he was beaten, and truth be told, he wouldn't have it any other way. 3 weeks later, Tommy and Tuppence sat in their comfortable sitting room in London, the morning sun once again slanting through the windows in cheerful squares. The Times lay open on Tommy's lap, though he wasn't reading it. Instead, he was watching Tuppence, who sat curled in her armchair with a satisfied smile, reading a letter. "It's from Aunt Beatrice," she announced. "The painting has been authenticated by 3 different experts. The museum is absolutely thrilled. They're planning a special exhibition, Edward Torrance, Vindication of a Master." "And the numbers on the card?" "Ah, that's the interesting part." Tuppence's smile grew wider. "They've cracked the code. It references 3 more locations. Country houses where Torrance painted during his career. The museums have been notified, and searches are underway. Let me guess," Tommy said. "You've already written to volunteer our assistance? Well, one of the houses is in Yorkshire. We've never properly explored Yorkshire. And another is near Bath, which we both enjoyed during that business with the jewels. Tuppence, yes, darling? We promised ourselves a quiet month. And we've had 3 whole weeks. That's quite respectable, don't you think?" Tommy opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He picked up the newspaper, shaking it out with exaggerated precision. "I suppose," he said carefully, "that Yorkshire is rather lovely in the autumn." "That's the spirit." Tuppence bounced up and kissed him on the forehead. "I'll telephone the hotel this afternoon. Pack your tweeds, Tommy. I have a feeling this next investigation will require proper country attire." As she bustled out of the room, humming cheerfully, Tommy allowed himself a small smile. Life with Tuppence Beresford was never boring, never predictable, and never, despite her promises, quiet. But then again, he thought as he returned to his newspaper, quiet had always been rather overrated. That evening, as they prepared for dinner, the post brought one more letter. This one was addressed to Tuppence in an unfamiliar hand. She opened it curiously. Inside was a single sheet of aged paper, covered in the same spidery handwriting as Charlotte Ashford's unfinished letter. But this was different. A complete page, dated the same day as the first. Tuppence read it aloud to Tommy. Actually, 2 paintings in one. He has shown me how he can create what he calls ghost images. Subtle marks and shadows that, when viewed under certain light or from certain angles, reveal a completely different scene beneath the visible portrait. He believes he can hide these ghost images in plain sight, creating puzzles for future generations. He's quite brilliant, though I fear his cleverness may destroy him. The portrait he's painting of me contains such a ghost image, he tells me. He won't say what it shows, but he promises it will protect something precious. I don't entirely understand his meaning, but I trust him. If anything should happen to me, Herbert, know that the truth is hidden where I am captured in paint. Look deeper than the surface. The woman in blue holds more secrets than she seems to tell. Your loving wife, Charlotte. Tommy and Tuppence looked at each other. Ghost images, Tommy said slowly, beneath the visible painting. That means the portrait they found still holds another secret, Tuppence finished. Something hidden even deeper than the Torrance masterpiece. Something Charlotte knew about and tried to preserve. Should we tell Inspector Marsh? The museum? Tuppence thought for a moment, then carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Tomorrow, she said. Tonight let's enjoy our tea and our triumph. Tomorrow is soon enough for new mysteries. They went down to dinner, both lost in their own thoughts. Neither noticed the envelope that had contained Charlotte's letter, lying forgotten on the table. On its back, in modern handwriting, was a single line. Some secrets are meant to be found. Others are meant to keep searching. The game continues. L.X.C. Outside their window, the London evening settled in with its usual mixture of lamplight and shadow. And somewhere out there, mysteries waited, as they always had, as they always would, for clever people willing to chase them. But that, as they say, is a story for another day.